This is actually my 10th scale. I just realized that, which is pretty awesome. Actually the first time I came here, I asked Elon if I could get, I was at Chef for 2 weeks, and I was like, shoot, I went up to him and said, if anybody cancels, can I give a Chef presentation? So I gave the first Chef presentation here, by the way, so in case you're interested. The divine and felonious nature of cybersecurity, otherwise called Introduction to DevOps. My name is John Willis. The best way to get a hold of me is Botchagaloop, which is a horrible Twitter name. I thought it would be really clever whenever we've all got our Twitter handles. And I put it on every slide because honestly, if you want to get a hold of me, if there's anything that interests you or you want to talk about this stuff, like if you can somehow remember that, you'd be in good shape. A little bit about my background, if you don't know me. I round down now. I'm 58, so I say somewhere north of 35 years in IT. But about 10 years ago, I jumped into kind of distributed computing. Before that, I was doing kind of IBM, still sort of, it was enterprise stuff, but I was actually there was only 3 or 4 cloud evangelists in the world, Jeff Barr, James Urquhart, of course, Simon Wardley, and I went to work for Simon Wardley over at Canonical to introduce the first private cloud. It was based on, it was called Ubuntu Enterprise Cloud. Anybody heard of it? It was terrible. I mean, it was horrible. It was just a mean thing of life to treat people that have to use that. Then this guy, Adam Jacob, poked me and asked me if I would come in and be the old guy in his little startup called Chef. I was the 9th person in. I kind of helped build a customer-facing business there. That was awesome. And in fact, that was my kind of, Adam gave me a credit card and said, just go to every DevOps days on the planet. I'm like, okay, that sounds good. I think today I'm still the one who has gone to more DevOps days than anybody else. I left there. Another friend of mine was doing a startup. Just kind of give you a background. It sounds like I'm bragging, and I am, but I'm trying not to. But I like that, right? So you cover your base there. He said, I want you to do what you did at Chef for us. He had this multi-cloud manager thing that it's called Stratius. I'm sure nobody's heard of it, but we did sell it to Dell. That was awesome. Paid off all my entrepreneurial sins on that one. Left there, kind of got into networking stuff, got myself into all sorts of trouble, created a company called Socket Plane, sold it to Docker within 3 months, didn't even get started, and then we did SDN. We did an SDN interface for Docker. So all the networking stuff you've ever seen, you can either blame me or give credit for it, that Docker's had over the last 4 years. And I left Docker about 5 months ago, and I'm going back to consulting. So prior to Ubuntu, that's what I did forever. I built transformation, meta, kind of, how do you help people systemically improve? So that's, I like that kind of work. On the right-hand side, a couple other things you should know about me is I knew this was going to happen. I was I was the only American in the original DevOps days. So I've been literally heavily involved in this DevOps thing we did. Started a podcast years ago. Got to meet Gene. I don't know, 8 years ago. This is good, it'll work. It'll fall off periodically, but. Patrick DeBar, actually he said I'm the godfather. It's actually, Patrick DeBar is the godfather of DevOps. I figure I'm the consigliere. But I got to kind of shadow and help him kind of change the narrative of the Phoenix Project. How many people have read the Phoenix Project? All right, not enough, okay. Yeah, it's an amazing book. It's a novel about a theory of constraints with a Java program and a Java stack. I mean, it's awesome, right? And if you ever heard of Elliot Goldratt, it's a rewrite of his book. Anyway, so I was able to kind of think about what would we do after this novel came out. So did that, and then I've been in something called the Enterprise Summit. Because I met Gene, I've had this incredible opportunity to be involved in a couple of books. DevOps Handbook. I actually have a couple of copies. I only brought about 4 or 5, but if you want to have a nice dialogue with me and it's an interesting conversation after this, I'll give you a signed copy if you want. If you want to tell me I'm full of crap on the presentation, you might get one too. So, it sold over 100,000 copies in its first year, and we've been self-publishing it, so that's pretty cool. Phoenix Project sold 400,000 copies. I don't get anything for that. Yesterday, my second real book dropped. Could be on the Phoenix Project. It's on audio. It's an audio only. So pretty excited. Also, I worked on some other projects. Anyway, to the point. So I call this thing the divine and felonious nature of cybersecurity. Has anybody ever read anything by Bill Bryson? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a couple, yeah. So he's a travel writer, and he's very funny, and he's very informative. You've probably heard of that book, The Walk in the Woods, he talks about the Appalachian Trail, and it's just hilarious, right? So he wrote a book about the history of everything, which really was the history of science. And it's a great book, but this is my favorite, maybe a second favorite quote from any book ever written. Maybe Jonathan Swift is probably the first one, the Confederacy and Dunces, but I digress. He says, so here's the deal. He sets the stage. He says, basically, at the time that Newton is finishing Principia, and basically trying to just describe everything that's going on about our physical universe, there are two idiot sailors at the Galapagos Islands killing the last two dodo birds on the planet, putting extinct, right? And he's like, God, how do we do this as humans? And he says, in the middle there, you'd be hard-pressed, I would submit, to find a better pairing of occurrences to illustrate the divine and felonious nature of a human being. So I'm going to use that as a narrative, and I'm going to tell you why it was actually at a conference, a cyber conference, where I thought about this idea that cyber is not as bad as extincting a whole species, but like cybersecurity is pretty felonious. The felonious nature of cybersecurity. So let's talk about why I think some of the things in cybersecurity are felonious. So in 2016, the Verizon DBI report said that 10 CVEs, National Institute of Technology database, accounted for 97% of all the known breaches. But here's the kicker. I don't know if you might not have time to read that. 8 of them were 10 years old. So when we talk about like some foreign actor and like all this, 60 Minutes and oh my God, these foreign, like these are kids, 18-year-old kids. They're just saying you're a bunch of idiots. Like you've got that vulnerability thing that's been known for 10 years in your production environment. And again, like no nation state army of cyber people required. And by the way, I love open source. Open source is awesome, and nothing I will say is to be interpreted as a negative to open source, but you should be aware that open source opens up a lot of opportunities for adversaries. Incredible amount of adversarial activity. Because, you write 10 lines of code, what happens? It could be like 1,000 lines of code, 10,000 lines of code behind the scenes. All the libraries extraction. This is, Sonatype does a state of supply chain. You should totally read it, it's brilliant. 31 billion, they manage Maven Central, right? So 31 billion component downloads requested annually. 228,000 average components per company. Look at that second one. 5,275 average unique component versions. When they did healthcare.com, the postmortem on that, they found out they were running 21 Java logging frameworks, right? If you read the Google SRE book, it tells you that Google, and I'm going by the book, so if you work for Google and you want to correct me, don't, because I'm going by the book. Basically, it says they have 2 of everything. And that's actually a Deming principle, but I digress again. The average cost of 10% of a breach could be 7.2, anywhere from $5 to $8 million a breach, and again, that varies. Some of you might know what this is. Anybody? Quick! Jeopardy! Bang! It's Struts 2, right? Or otherwise called the Equifax debacle. So Struts 2 was, there's a library, there's a parsing routine, and if you're one of those kids, not those cyber states, that all you want to do is put in like a pound and execute a shell script in the escape, put your root access on a machine, right? So here's the thing. And this was actually, there's been a couple, this was last year's flavor. On 3.6, as far as I can do research, there was a company that mentioned this. They've discovered it. It was actually officially announced on 3.9, I think Red Hat, or, the actual CVE was created on 3.10. And again, I think that last presentation about safety culture, it was brilliant, right? Because, I'm not going to sit here and do counterfactuals on what, Equifax should have done this, and Equifax shouldn't have. That's like, in complex systems, that just doesn't work. But it's worth looking at that they don't discover it to July 2017, and they announce it in September 2017. Right, and then here's some data that, so I want to talk about another company that dealt with this same CVE. So Fannie Mae. And so Fannie Mae So you think about, again, I've got to say things bad about Equifax. I have friends over there. I don't want to counterfactual and say they should have done this, should have done that. It's like like we could say that it was a human error for that Hawaii missile thing, right? Like that you can't do that. But what I can do is compare two companies. And I can tell you that Fannie Mae, I work with them a little bit. In fact, I'm co-speaking with the woman who runs AppSec at RSA in San Francisco. And they have this true north, and it's kind of built around we want to be America's most valuable housing partner. And so here's the thing, if that really is your true north, then on basically 3.9, you got to really smell the coffee about what the potential is to happen. No, Equifax, how many millions and millions of records got? If I've got all your loan applications and everything, and I want to say that statement on my website. So here's the thing. The woman who did this, she went to the executive staff on 3/10, 3/11, a little fuzzy on the dates, but it was basically discovered on Tuesday, and then by Thursday or Friday, she went to the C-level team, the CEO, everybody, and said, the only way that we can protect our true north is I have to have you shut down the loan application. Over the weekend, I don't know if I bought a couple of houses, almost all of my loans happening on the weekend. They said yes. Because that value add, how do you dance the dance when it's time to dance? That sounds silly, but... and they did it. They danced the dance. And by the way, I don't want to spend too much time on this because it get too complicated, but it wasn't easy to find all the places that was. Because some of them were embedded in, it was, Apache, Tomcat, Struts to Jakarta, parsing thing. It was in WebSphere, it was embedded things. There have been applications that hadn't been vulnerability scanned, even ones that had. There still was no CVE till the 10th. And who knows when the signature came out to be actually scan it. But they had it. She went ahead, she wrote a little script, very similar to this script here, and hit every internal, external URI. And by Sunday night, she remediated every instance. And it was just a script that read Etsy password from URL. And she was able to remediate. And the reason she got turned, she got tired, 100 people behind her desk. You got to fix it. It's like, everybody go away, shut it down. Let me fix this over the weekend. So here's the thing. As of fall 2017, again, this is Sonatype data. They're just doing great stuff. 3,000 organizations download the exact Struts 2 that hit. All right, they're not paying attention. It was March, and now it's September, 3,000 companies. But here's the real kicker. As of fall 2017, almost 50,000 organizations are running a vulnerable version of Struts 2. I can tell you right now, we can go over there and we write a little script to go hit a Tomcat, to go find, a default built-in Jenkins server, hit your Amazon accounts, and by the way, that's how NSA got breached. They scanned all the S3 buckets, and they basically broke into a Struts 2 Jakarta. It wasn't Jakarta, it was Struts 2, and then it went in through a default installed Jenkins server, which is as strange, dangerous as it gets. 50,000. And so, we learned our lesson, right? We're not Felonious. You're full of crap, John. So on 9/21, it was published. I got to think that nobody knew about this published and nobody cared, but in basically spring, pivotal spring, in a rescue team, a very similar situation where you could escape in. This CV 215, it's actually 178046, sorry. I get a little typo there. There actually is a 15, but it's not this one. The CVA was created in January, but it wasn't discovered until 218, and it wasn't corrected until 3.6. Right? Again, I'm not picking on Pivotal, but you did the numbers. How many people run in spring? And let's look at some of the numbers. They'll fool me once. Yeah, shame on me. Basically, 5 months prior to that discovery, 400,000 people were running that spring component. 5 months after, basically to February 18th, it only 11% dip 367,000 people are running that. Like, we're doing a shitty job, folks. And I'm not even getting into the hard stuff. And so one of the things that was interesting is and how many people have heard of Martin Casado? He invented SDN. He was this like brilliant Stanford kid that the NSA went to and said, I think you're the smartest guy on the planet. Now I can't confirm that. And I want you to solve this incredibly hard problem. And he spent like a couple of years trying to solve it, and he couldn't solve it. And I guess it was unsolvable, but out of that, he came up with the invention of SDN. Created Nicira, sold it to VMware for $1.2 billion with 4 customers and no revenue. Okay. And about a year later, he became the head of network for VMware, and they started this idea of what they called the Goldilocks zone. It was interesting, because he was starting to point out something, which is the felonious nature of cybersecurity, is that we are very brainwashed, we have memory muscle on the idea that we do perimeter-based, we have static firewalls coming in perimeter, all data's coming in north, south, prevention, right? And he was talking about, well, guys, we spend 80% of our money on prevention and perimeter, and 20% on what happens when you get in. And I'll tell you the story of why I came up with this thing in a little bit. So again, he was saying that, that we need to rethink this. And now the way they thought about it, I would say, on the whole, probably didn't work the way it should have. But their idea was you were going to put security in the hypervisor and the virtual switch, and then have a callback system with the node where you could talk to Puppet or Chef or anything like that. It didn't seem to really work the way it did. But the thing I love about it was this idea that instead of waiting out there, we need to come in here. And I think that's not close enough. So this Goldilocks zone is an interesting idea about trying to change the narrative of people who talk about prevention and perimeter and static. And the truth is, not only the presentation this morning was brilliant, right? Like, not only is network traffic used to be 90% north-south and 10% east-west. In large web-scale organizations, basically network traffic is basically flipped. It's 90% east-west, and it's about 10%. In fact, about 2.5, 3 years ago, I know there's a couple of Facebook people here, I saw a report when I did the calculation, it looked like 98% east-west. So, this felonious nature thing. So I was at a Chicago conference. It was a cyber conference. And I was the afternoon keynote, and there was this guy who did the morning keynote, and he was a hacker, Confessions of a Hacker. So they had him hidden in some room. They basically put a hoodie and grayed his face and changed his voice. And he just started telling like these 5 hacks that he did. And by the way, again, he's not working for China, he's not working for Russia, he's not working for whoever. Working for himself, probably yanking $500,000 a year. Because he goes into your bank, and he basically sells on the dark net, or to the orange and purple net, whatever, the data that he gets. And he talked about, 4 to 5 stories he told about, how he got in? He tailgated. He followed somebody in the door. He took some precautions. He went there a week early. He found out where you all drank coffee, what Starbucks. He tried to RFID clone your badge. But in general, he wanted to see how you dressed, see if you could pick any buzzwords. And 4 to 5 times, he didn't even have to use an RFID badge. He said, hey, you hold the door. And he got right in. And when he got in, he found an empty floor of cubes, like nobody has these, right? And then he found and put a Raspberry Pi. Now he's in. Like those guys, once you're in, there's so many ways to get in your network. And he proxies out and he's got you. Right? So I was thinking about that, and he was kind of making fun of us as an industry. Like he was a kid that probably never been in IT, and he was like, you guys, why do you let me in the door? I think you're really stupid. And I'll talk about that at the end, because I think that's that's where I start thinking about this divine and felonious nature, right? I don't know if this works, but come with me. So let's talk about a little DevOps first, all right? Because I'm going to give you the really, really short course on DevOps to kind of drive the conclusion here. Most of you know this. So we got Agile. Now, I've been an operations person my whole career. I've been just everything operations. And I remember the first time somebody told me about Agile, and I'm like, Well, dang, you never gave us the memo, right? Like the Agile Manifesto and we're like, yeah, but like, we're like, next March, next, October, right? Like it was like a total impedance mismatch of one side just going incredibly fast, having all these manifesto and great stuff, which was awesome. And the ops people just like, and then somewhere around 2007, 2008, Luke Knies with Puppet, and things started popping up. Chef with Adam Jacobs, late 2009. DevOps, coined in 2009. We started thinking about these collaborative ideas, and then we did this DevOps thing. Also, somewhere along the way, Werner Vogel, the CTO of Amazon, did this interview where he said, at Amazon we do it differently. We have these teams, we call them 2 pizza teams, and unless you have me on a team, then it's 3 pizza teams. God, let's get that one in. And he said that, like at Amazon, we have this you build it, you run it. The developers own the delivery of the service, or the service the team, whatever you want to call it. Enough of this siloed, and this group gets it, and when they're done, I get it. Right? That became DevOps. Now, whether it was 2 pizza team or whether it was, creating developers so that they can create full chain with the, first operations, then QA, and allowing them to put the meta into the supply chain, right? Because that was the shift. Originally, the first argument was, hey, the dev and ops, you need to work together. How do we do that? Well, the ops people need to be more feeding in so the developers can do the things. Early days of DevOps, we said things like developers were pagers. If you build it, you build it, you run it, you get woken up. Like you think about technical debt in a whole different way, and operationalization. And so here we are in 2018, but maybe we're all patting ourselves on the back. This is the 5th DevOps day here. There's been Amsterdam and Austin been run them, and we're all just like amazingly great and awesome. And we got through the memo thing from the Agile and the Ops, and this is where I throw my hat on the ground and say, God dog it, we forgot about security. We did the same thing all over again. And so how many people have heard the concept of the Amdon cord? Right? It comes so a lot of what comes into DevOps comes from Lean. And that last book I talked about, that audio book that just went yesterday, me and Gene spent a lot of time talking about Lean. So the Amdon cord was a scenario where at Toyota, line workers, edge workers, had the power to ultimately stop the line. I mean, there was a set of rules before the actual line stopped, but the point was, here's an interesting thing on culture. You want to read a great book, Toyota Kata by Mike Rother. He said that he spent like a year over there. Like he was part of the people that studied Lean. Then he went over to Japan to really understand it. And he said what a floor manager would do when you pull the Amdon cord is they thank you before they even knew what you did, because basically you were creating a learning culture, right? Anyway. There's a great story about a Toyota plant in Kentucky that was creating like 2,200 cars a day. And there was analysts went in there to find out about it, and they said, well, how do you do that? And they said, oh, we pull the Amdon cord 5,000 times a day. Hopefully your head's spinning a little right now. It's an anti-fragile message, even though Nassif Taleb is an idiot. But we can talk about that later too. But that's what we do in DevOps. I'm not into the DevSecOps stuff yet, right? This was the old 2008, Agile 2008, Chris Reed, Dan North, and Jez Humble, right? But this is what we do. We put our gates in. We automate things. The developer checks something in. It goes through this, hits a red gate, goes back. Developer fixes it, gets next gate, red, goes back. And we do this over time with small batch commit, and hopefully same trunk deploy, all those kind of principles. And we create resilience. And there's no better example than Google. This is 5 years old. And you can read all the other numbers, but that's the number that blows me away. 5 years ago, 75 million automated tests a day. I saw a presentation in 2016, it was 150 million. If you work for Google and you want to update me, and I'll update my slides, 150 million automated tests a day. That is that Kentucky plant in software. That's where you're creating that gating resilience over time at speed. So that's the thing we learned about DevOps is that if you have certain cultural behaviors, you can go faster and be more resilient. That's the secret. And in fact, we've actually learned that if you actually have those right behavior patterns, the faster you go, the more resilient you get. How about that? So, the DevOps Handbook, quickly, we tried to codify about a little over a year ago, all the things that we think it's done very well. It's I'm only 1/4 of the other 3 authors are like incredibly amazing. You know most of this. Everybody's responsible. Done means release. Stop the line when it breaks. Right? You break the build. Remove silos. And one thing I realized, we actually set the foreground for the discussion about separation of duties, because that's one of the first armors in the security discussion. Separation of duties. Yeah, you can't do that DevOps thing. Why? Well, it's the ops team and the dev team, if they work for build. Well, okay, we automated it. Nobody gets to shell into this machine. It's all automated. It's all audited. All right. So all these apply to security. We just got to get the security people to get out of that felonious nature mode, right? And then, the things on continuous delivery. I mean, you hear this over and over. So in summary on DevOps, Agile took us months to days to deliver software. Great. When the ops people got the memo, we were able to take, kind of DevOps from months to days to deploy the software. Right? It was no more throw it over the wall. We figured out how to work together and combine and automate them. So now, actually a little while back, there was a couple of people started this thing called the Rugged Manifesto. Anybody heard of it? 1, 2. Right? It was good. It's great, right? And if you do this, I recognize that my code will be used in ways I can't anticipate, in ways that were not designed and made no longer than it was intended. Remember those 8 CVs? They're 10 years old, right? I recognize my code will be attacked by talented and persistent adversaries who threaten our physical and economic. Here's the thing. There's a woman, Shannon Leitz, platonically in love with this woman. She's I don't know, she's goddess, but she's the most amazing thought leader when it comes to security. She works into it. I just follow her around the breadcrumbs to learn. She talks about adversaries. She says, here's nothing, we suck. The adversaries have dark web, they team up, they work together. They're DevOps, by the way, and it's security. They're collaborating, they're sharing information, they're telling you about the banks and everything. Does Bank of America talk to JP Morgan Chase? No, we know this. And so, I stole this from Josh Corman, but I believe it's such that, so Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world, right? Way back, Mark Andreessen is famous VC now. But really, if you think about that software side and open source side, it's infecting the world. And again, I'm not trying to tell you that open source is bad, because it is. It's awesome. But it comes with a heavy-handed cost. So we get to DevSecOps. So I started thinking about what's different about Rugged and this DevSecOps thing. And it was back to the core principles of what DevOps did. You had Dev and Ops. We tried to figure out how to get that all on the same page so the Ops and Dev were working together. And more specifically, Ops were basically trying to create tools and meta and policy so that developers could operationalize their software. Could remove the operational technical debt, because they would take care of that. And the operations people would be the people who put the guardrails, the policy. So I would contend that, and I've got a couple of presentations where I call it you build it, you secure it. It's a play on the Vernal Organs. And that is that we need to get to a point where developers completely own security. There is no reason, just like we did with Ops and QA and any other group where we tried to integrate, we still have to, and it's hard, because there's so much memory muscle on a security group and how they think about things, and they're still thinking parameter-based and prevention. But we have to get them to flip. And the women at Fannie Mae, and actually Shannon Leitz and Intuit, have done this magically, where the security people see themselves as the people that feed the opportunities for the developers to create secure and safe code. At Fannie Mae, they have GitHub repositories with all the known OWASP things. They've written their own wiki so that a developer doesn't have to pull their hair out when they go to the OWASP site, because they're not a security person. They explain it in a way that it makes sense to developers. Every time they find a new vulnerability, they put the example correct code in their own internal GitHub project. Like a lot of cool things. My other presentation, I spent a lot more time on that. because I wanted this to be a higher, more meta presentation. And so here, you should have had this conclusion already, right? Like, what about DevSecOps as an abstraction onto the thing that we've done so freaking well since 2008, 10 years ago? Those red gates not only should be like test-driven development for stories or behavior-driven development for stories related to the code, they should be test-driven development for security things, security stories, technical debt for security. It should be behavior-driven that do port scans. But why is this port open? Why it should be open? Among a whole bunch of other things. And then hopefully we get that resilience, right? I mean, not hopefully. I know we get that resilience. We get basically the Kentucky plant in color red, like a red Corvette. Although that's General Motors. But here's the thing, right? So think about the supply chain. So I want to contrast this to what we do and why I keep saying we're kind of felonious in the cybersecurity thing. So imagine, most of you, I'm sure, how many people are more than like the third DevOps days? Oh, really? Not that many. Okay. I mean, but if you start listening to the DevOps message over and over, you get the sense that there's this shift left idea. We try to take things to the right and we move them to the left to get them in the automation of the flow. We try to find things. And I imagine I go in a shop and like, John, my DevOps environment is freaking killer. Get in there like, yeah, we use Eclipse and we got some really good helper plugins. Version control for the birds. Idiots who do that. CI Jenkins, it's always throwing red messages up, so we just turned it off. But we do a hell of a job with Selenium for behavior-driven, and we're kicking the shit out of it with Ansible. You'd be like, okay, I'll see you later. Because the truth of the matter is, right, if we saw that, we would know it was really kind of an anti-pattern to what we want to try to accomplish with DevOps. With the behavior and other things, not just technology. But, I always say that all the buckets have to be filled if you want to shift left. So we've done that with security. I mean, so with security, we've had this like it's table stakes to do vulnerability scanning, although a lot of people don't do it. But it's table stakes. So there's no artifacts that come to that system where either JFrog or Docker, Docker Data Center or Twistlock or Nexus, Sonatype, is telling you, ooh, I just saw a binary signature. That's a bad thing. Red. I mean, like, if you're not doing that, like, you're really, really being criminal to your organization. And most people, think that we should be doing that. So that's table stakes. But, like, those people will have that and maybe some behavior-driven, but they'll have nothing in the IDEs. They'll have nothing in version control. They'll have a couple of things here. So what DevSecOps means is two things, in my opinion. One is you build it, you secure it. So whether it's the developer or the service team, takes full ownership, and the other organizations now, including security, I'm sorry, security people, you got to get on board. You just got to flip your mindset. We're not going to. You're just as important as ever. You just need to turn your meta and stuff into automation to help developers do what you want them to do anyway. And then every bucket has to be filled with some kind of solution. And none of these are endorsements, right? I just took simple names that the first icon I could find. But like in the bottom row, there are find bugs. There's IDE plugins for IntelliJ, and we'll actually pop up red on something that's a known vulnerability. There's an open source find bugs at the build layer. Right, everybody and their brother, Black Duck, the Martifact guys, Nexus and JFrog, and Docker has come to theirs, and Twistlock will do it, and a lot of people do it. So you need one of those. Right, and then there's a whole bunch of tools in between to build and test. Veracode, Fortify, Gauntlet's a really cool open source project by one of the founders of Rugged DevOps, James Wickett. Qualsys, Twistlock, Dome9, Evident.io, which will do a real-time investigation of bad hygiene and policy in your Amazon. Right? I don't care. I'm just saying, and I'm building actually a maturity capabilities matrix right now. And I'm doing consulting, and I'm saying, you don't have one of these. That means that you're, a medium to low performance organization. And so one of the things, the news company that I went to, and it's an 8A woman owned, and she's got Karen, who's my boss, is actually got a lot of contracts with DoD, the OPM and all this stuff. So we've been actually working with slam right in hey, John, this is what we need. Okay, DevOps or DevSecOps in a regulated environment. I don't want to go through all this, but it gets really serious. Not only fill in the box, but fill in the box. And this is actually from Gartner. Usually Gartner, no disrespect, I've got two really good friends at Gartner. Everybody else I dislike. And I mean that. They're usually full of crap, except those two guys. Although this guy who's been doing the DevSecOps stuff he's pretty spot on. And this is a really cool chart. And I won't spend, how much time do I got? Doing all right. He did this thing that's really good. It's another, I'm doing a capabilities thing that's kind of a pivot on this. But I like this, right? Do you have open source governance in design, in the IDE, in the repository, in the CI post-deployment? Do you have open source software allowances? Do you do SAST or DAST, right? Static application testing, dynamic application testing. Are you doing interactive? Are you doing RASP, right? These are the things, what are you doing, and what is your architecture, and what are your known capabilities, and how do you match to, and this is kind of the full circles, I would say, he doesn't say this in his report, would be must-haves. The kind of half and quarter circles would be nice-to-haves, or should-haves. And the ones that are, kind of NA would be basically, in a sense, I mean, some of the products, there aren't even solutions there for some of the boxes, but would be nice-to-haves. That's red, yellow, green for me. Red means you don't have a must-have. Yellow means you don't have a should-have. And green means I don't give a shit. So I say, I was gonna ping. I was actually, in all honesty, I thought I was gonna be a little more nervous because I finished this. I took an old presentation and rewrote it, and I wrote most of it on the plane ride here. But I mean, I had all the data, so I'm not faking it. But as I was thinking about the Goldilocks zone, I thought about Martin, and I'm gonna ping him. And I'm like, dude, the real Goldilocks zone is DevSecOps. That's the place. So here's the thing, think about the Equifax thing. I don't know if they had Palo Alto or they had, these multi-million-dollar boxes that do prevention. All these companies have that. But they don't get a zero-day vulnerability through that. Static firewalls don't protect you from that kid who tailgates into your building. I mean, the Goldilocks zone for the real thing, and by the way, the Israeli intelligence not going after your $100 million company, right? You know what's going after your $100 million company is some freaking kid that lives 2 blocks away from you who finds out that you're running a stupid, a Java or open source vulnerability thing, and he pwned you, and now he's got all your data. Right? So the Goldilocks zone has to be that the hygiene. It's one of the reasons that Fannie Mae was able to react so incredibly fast is she was a developer managing a Java developer for years, and they asked if she mind going into AppSec. I always joke about DevOps. Early days of DevOps, here's my joke. It was 3 developers had to do a startup. The one who drew the short straw had to do operations, right? And then what did that developer do? Treated operations like a developer discipline. This is actually what this woman did at Fannie Mae. She said, okay, security, got it. Okay, developers should own it. Okay, what do I got to do to help developers have a seamless control and ownership of this thing? And that's the Goldilocks zone. It was the Goldilocks zone for dev to ops and dev to QA. And I think it's the Goldilocks zone for security. So in the back of the book, we have some stuff for the DevOps handbook. So one of the things, when I left Docker, this was about 5 months ago, I really learned about consulting, and I'd been fortunate enough to work with a lot of groups that had done some really, really cool stuff. So I was advisor, consultant, whatever. And I decided when I was going to leave, I'm going to take all the things from the smartest people I did. So in other words, I didn't invent anything. And I'm going to use that as a practice. And so far in 5 months, it's been incredibly successful. So I go in and I use the known capabilities both for DevOps and DevSecOps. Okay, shows me about 7, but why does mine never match yours? Someday I'll figure that out. And then I do kind of value stream mapping, and it's interesting. And then I do this thing called Toyota Kata, and we do it on value stream by value stream and value stream, and we help companies kind of create a systemic rhythm of improvement. Nothing against Atlassian, but I barf when I try to have this conversation like, yeah, but can you install the Atlassian suite for us? No. Like, that's not going to create systemic improvement. Sorry. Putting Jenkins or Chef or Puppet or Docker, not going to create systemic improvement. All right, the divine in the 4 minutes I have left? How do you do that? God, I'm sorry. That was funny. So a few years ago, I had the opportunity to sit in and give a presentation to a CEO of a pretty big company. It's a weird set of circumstances. And I walked in with like 15 slides. And about the second slide, I got the tea. I said, in fact, it was actually in the kind of green room to meet the CEO. And he's like, you get like 5 minutes, 8 minutes if you stretch it. Like if you're going to talk, I didn't talk to Jamie Dimon, J.P. Morgan, but you're going to talk to Jamie Dimon, you got 8 minutes. You got to get your point in 5 minutes. And I realized I have another presentation where I'm like a kid with spaghetti all on my face. So like, I don't know shit about DevOps, because he's right. I couldn't explain DevOps in 2 slides. And I spent all year trying to think, could I do that? And I don't even think I can anyway. But I would say the conclusion I did after a year of thinking about this really hard, which is DevOps is a set of practice and patterns that turn human capital into high-performing organization house. Drop the mic. And there's my son. He's speaking tomorrow. Daniel, say hi to everybody. He's speaking on really cool statistical analysis and MP3 files and like cool stuff. So back to the Bryson quote, the divine and felonious nature of cybersecurity. So I was thinking about that kid, and I think of that kid this guy that was actually making fun of us all about how stupid we were for holding the door open for him. And I thought about that kid never worked in a company for 15 years. Because if you're 2 cubes away from me, and you're 2 paces away from me, and I don't hold the door for you, I'm not saying you, but you're like, what an asshole, John. And over years, there's Diane Vaughn who did like a lot of the Challenger analysis. She calls it the normalization of deviance. He doesn't know that we just like get tired of getting yelled at and beat up. And every year, the cyber people go on the stage and say, this year, never let anybody in the room without, you have to make them badge in, right? But then so we have our tailgating policies. And so, imagine if I'm telling you that this is what I think DevOps is. I also think this is what I call DevSecOps. It's a set of practices and patterns that turn human capital high-performance organization. I will tell you can ignore everything I've said and get this one right, and you win, 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 win. Susie, it's raining. She's pregnant. She's holding 10 boxes, 4 boxes. She's coming to the door, and she's 2 paces behind you. And you let the door close. Now you wait, because you're a gentleman. And she comes in, and you're like, oh, God, I'm going to get so beat up. But like, I was told I had to do it this way. And she walks up and you says, just remember the Toyota guy who comes up and thanks the person when they pull the iron cord? She comes up to you and says, I want to thank you because you just made our organization safer. And I'll cliche it, we might not get Equifax this year. Not easy. But that's why we always boast about culture. Because if this kid who steals your data, sells it for hundreds of thousands of dollars, tells you that the biggest breach that you have is letting people kind of tailgate in your door, you got to change the mentality and its culture and its behavior. I can't do the bonus material. Would have been cool. It's Docker stuff and immutability and containers, but sorry. Hey, thank you very much for letting me kind of just talk off the rails.